podcast.
Dear fellow listeners, the following is a conversation between Oriva Ogene Agbo, a UI UX student, and Malik Mbaye, an experienced UX designer. Malik Mbaye is passionate about the power of technology, building great businesses, and helping to groom young people into the leaders of tomorrow. Currently, he is working at Facebook as a product marketing manager, where he is conducting research, building and launching new features, and working on marketing campaigns for the company. Without UIs, it will be difficult to visualize the processes and progresses of our complex devices. Let us gather here as pupils as we listen to this insightful conversation.
Okay, so hi, my name is Riva, and I just started doing UI UX about a month and a half ago. So I just want to ask you, when did you start, and how was that for you?
I would say like formally I started in college because I took a class that was like Introductions to Human Computer Interactions. And that was the first class where I kind of got introduced to the principles of like UX design and stuff like that. And that was cool. I think that was my junior year of school, so year 3 for me. But when I took that class, I also realized that I'd been doing this informally for a while. Like I was making websites in high school. Like I had a blog, I made a couple websites like to sell stuff on. And so I was kind of familiar with the process of creating digital products. But I think it was in college that I learned that, hey, there's actually a method to go through to actually bring those products to life that makes them way better and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's when I got started.
It's like way different. I actually finished school. I had actually started a job that I was very unhappy with. Like I was super sad doing that job. And then I found one day I started using Figma. I'm sure you know about Figma. I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like I think I like this. And that just like set me on a path, and I dived into UI UX. So something I've noticed, and I can relate to what you said about the fact that you noticed that those are things you were like low-key doing already. That's also something I sort of noticed. But then also I before I started any of this, I was into like graphic design. I just paint for fun. Like if you can see behind me, I did that. But what I learned when I started this was that is way different from I used to look at it as, oh, design is design, but that is 100 times different from what UI UX is. And it's just been a wonderful journey, just learning all those new things. So when I tell people about UI UX, they get confused. So how would you, as somebody who's been in the field for a while, how would you tell somebody who is asking you about your job?
Like if they're asking me like, what is UI UX type stuff, right?
Yeah.
Well, the way I like to think about it is there's different types of design, first of all, right? Like there's this big design, and then there's like UI UX design, and then you can kind of like break it down. There's product design, which is a little bit different, and different types of products have their own intricacies and stuff like that. So like building an enterprise product for like for example, Stripe or PayPal is different from building Instagram stories slightly. But like when I think about UI UX design, I think about the UI as like the wrapper, right? It's like it's what you actually see and what you interact with, the interface. And the UX is how all of that stuff works. So it's like, what do you see when based off of where you are in the journey? Because UX design is about like really helping the user achieve some type of goal, right? Because anytime somebody comes to a product, they have a problem they need to solve, they have something they need to do. they have a job they need to accomplish, etc. And the UX is basically how we guide them through that process to actually accomplish their goal. And so with that in mind, it's about like, okay, well, how do we make this as simple as possible so that anyone can get it in a way that is like non-discriminatory, right? Like, you know, is how do we make this as intuitive as possible? How do we make this so like, you know, it's so good you don't even notice it, right? Like I think that's one of the things about, like they say about the hallmark of good design is like you go through the product and it's just so quick to get what you want. It's like, okay, cool. And it's like you can focus on your life. So you don't even have to worry about any other stuff that's going on with the product. We kind of take care of it for you. And you just kind of go through the process. So that's how I like to think about UI versus UX. Like UI is like the wrapper, and then UX is like how, you know, we actually help them achieve their goal. So a good way to break it down could be like the UI is the what, the tangible what, and then the UX is like the how and the why behind that thing that we're seeing and interacting with, you know.
Okay, so for I guess people who are listening or who will listen and don't really understand UI, UX. UI means user interface and UX means user experience.
Yeah.
So what are some of the processes you go through, like working in a do you do freelance work? You probably did freelance work before you started. So process in freelance is obviously different from working in a corporation, in a company where there are design styles and there are design systems that you have to use to, you know, stay on brand and all of that. So just like talk us through your process and like educate me, because that's why I'm here. Just want to learn so much from you. So just talk us through your process as a freelancer and as somebody working in an organization.
Yeah. So two very different types of experiences. So I think one thing that would be helpful is to kind of like talk about like what type of design that I actually do in my freelance practice. So I primarily focus on like web design. So making websites, marketing websites, e-commerce websites, online learning websites. I recently just started getting into product design as well, like designing apps and things like that, because I feel like it's just an extension of UI. And the businesses that I typically work with are people who, you know, are good at what they do, but now it's time for them to invest into building a brand, and you know, their website is very important, so they want to make sure that it helps them accomplish their goals, and it also helps them connect with people emotionally, right? Like it's a brand that you want to kind of be a part of, right? So what we really do is we help people build their brands and create a platform for their businesses, right? So that is a very specific type of design. And so my process usually starts with meeting with the client to figure out, okay, what are your needs? What are you actually trying to accomplish? Like, what is their understanding of the problem? A lot of times people are going to come to you with solutions that they've already come up with and they want someone to implement it. But I like to focus on like, okay, what problem are you trying to solve? And let's align on that. And then let's think from like a first principles perspective on how do we actually solve that problem, right? So the first meeting is usually just us. I'm just listening. I'm asking questions and I'm listening and I'm letting them talk. All right. And I think that's a really important skill for designers, is just to be a really good listener. And you have to be able to suss out what people actually need from what they say that they need or from what they say that they want. Right. And that's a big thing, like not letting the client be the solution designer, right? Like, because if you go to a doctor, you wouldn't be the one telling the doctor how to operate on you. It's like, yeah, okay, I'm about to get surgery. Can you cut me down the middle? And then I want you to you're not doing that. Or you go to a lawyer. That's not gonna happen, right? So you got a lot of young designers, and I did that too. It's like you're kind of like, you're scared to, you know, I don't know, like you want to like be authoritative, I guess. But yeah, basically don't let the client like guide give you the solution. You want to be able to listen to them and understand what is the problem, and then you work together to figure out what's the best solution. So that's step one. I call that the discovery or strategy process. Once I have a good understanding of the problem they're trying to achieve, why they actually need this website or digital product or whatever, it's now about like, okay, well, let's start mapping that out. So I'll usually go through the process of kind of just doing some mind mapping in a notebook, like, okay, like this is generally how I think this could work, and try to kind of put all my thoughts on paper, because sometimes it's hard to, because I feel like products can have a lot of different nuances and complexity. So sometimes balancing it all in your head can feel overwhelming. I like to write things down and map it out. And then from there, I go and I start like finding inspiration. So I'm very big on like not starting from scratch. I used to think that didn't make me a real designer, because like I find mood boards and I use templates and all that kind of stuff. But I've since gotten over that, because I realized that design is about solving problems, right? It's about creating outcomes. How you get to the outcome, sure. I mean, like, yeah, you want to go through a process and deliver good results, but like what matters most at the end of the day is delivering an outcome, and making sure that the client is happy and the end user achieves their goal, the business captures value, all that good stuff. So I'll go through a mood boarding process where, you know, I'm spending a lot of time on Pinterest and I'm studying different types of design. And I'm screening it like for a lot of different qualities. Like I'm looking at it from, you know, just a pure visual design standpoint. I'm like, okay, what are the types of visual design trends that I'm seeing? What do these types of visual designs actually communicate what this brand wants to communicate? Like if I'm going to work on a fitness brand, it's not the same if I'm going to work on a skincare brand, right? And so I want to make sure that the visual, I want to find a visual direction that matches the character or the spirit of the brand that we're working with. So I'm going through Pinterest, I'm going through different websites, and I'm finding references, and I'm kind of doing an analysis on each of them. I'm taking notes on what works, what doesn't work. A lot of times you'll find, like, designers love Dribbble and stuff like that, and a lot of times you'll find on Dribbble really beautiful designs, but they're not always functional. And so being able to like break that down, like, okay, this looks good for these reasons, and this is why it's a good visual design, good balance or whatever. But this is the stuff that doesn't really make sense here. And this is the stuff that we can improve. If I was, you know, doing this for this project, this is how we would tweak it. And you kind of start to like get a feel for the lay of the land. And then you figure out where does the customer, where does their project kind of fit into this massive arena. And so once I have the mood board, then it's like walking the client through that, like through the thinking, through just like the general direction, and making sure that they're on board. And then it's like, okay, cool. And then from there, like we do like a positioning session. Like we sometimes we do this in the first meeting, but sometimes it kind of like spills over where we kind of just like try to understand like what voice do they want to use, how do they want to come off. It's just kind of like understanding what adjectives does a client want to use to define themselves. So like, how do they want to be remembered? Like, you know, like how do they want to sound to their clients? Who are their actual end clients? Like, you know, I think those are all good things. And that basically helps you refine the mood board, right? So it's like now you have this general direction, but once you understand the brand positioning better, you can refine the direction even more. And then another thing I do is like, I think about what are the top 5 different types of businesses that your end user likes. So if I'm marketing to someone who loves these specific brands, I'm going to use those brands as guide points, as references, because they've already done a lot of the hard work of figuring out how to solve problems and how to add value. And they've invested tons of money and tons of research into it. And so I love doing competitive analyses on those brands and figuring out, okay, based off of the clients and the end user's favorite brands, how do we now craft the experience, right? And so all of that is basically me just like grounding us in the strategy, defining a general direction, and then starting to filter it based off of the unique brand and goals and attributes of this client and of this project. And then once we've aligned, we know where we're going now. We're like, okay, we're going here. Let's get there. Okay. So the next step is like, okay, well, now let's start getting into the how, right? And so we'll do some like mind mapping, some journey mapping of like how is this thing actually going to be organized structurally? What are you going to see where and when? How does that actually map back to the jobs that they need to accomplish in the app? Like if there's like 4 key things that I need to make sure that I do in this app, how do we make sure that they're all organized the right way? It matches people's assumptions of how things are going to work as well. And I map out that structure. Once we map out that structure, again, review it with the client, align on it, it's good. And then we go through a process of creating wireframes, and then we make it a little bit more high fidelity, add some color into it. And then we go on and create the full product. And if everybody's on board and, once we complete revisions, we go ahead and ship it. And so a lot of our projects, we just focus on actually designing the UI and the UX. Sometimes we like build the website or build the app, but a lot of times we'll just design the UI and just hand it off and like help them, like, give them guidance on how to implement it and like provide feedback with engineering. Because a lot of times when you actually go to start building stuff, you'll notice that things are very different when you're actually building them, and you have different limitations and stuff. And so you want to partner closely with your developer or your engineer to help you make sure that what you're designing is feasible and how you can tweak your design to make it work. So that's the general process that I go through. It's a process of like strategy, and then kind of like mood boarding and research. Then we come up with like the concept and the structure, and then we actually design it, and then we move on to development and make sure that like the implementation of it is actually good. So yeah, that's my process when I'm freelancing. But yeah.
That's awesome. So 2 things real quick.
Yeah.
Before I go on asking questions. Loving your hair and
thank you.
Loving Popeye.
Hey. I'm glad. I tried to, get the motivational energy going. So yeah. But yeah, I can talk through the process as well, like from a corporate perspective. Like the main difference between working in like freelance and corporate is corporations have a lot of more money to invest. And so each step of the process is very intentional, right? Like each step of the process is very intentional. It's like they basically have someone to do like each little thing. So you're not gonna be doing everything. So it's like, and it's much more research driven as well, right? Because you have resources to do a lot of research. So that's a big thing. So basically how things start is like every 6 months, you have a meeting to determine what the strategy for the next 6 months is going to be.
Okay.
At that point, you get the whole team together and you go through an exercise of brainstorming, of prioritization, of laying out a roadmap. And then once you have that, you have like, okay, these are our goals based off of like, this is who our end user is. These are the key people problems that we need to solve for. These are the key things we want to build out, whatever. And then it's time to actually start doing that. And so what's going to happen is, you'll probably do, like you'll work with your researcher to develop some questions on like, okay, like what should we actually build and why? How should it work? What isn't working about what we have now? Like all those questions, like you'll work with your researcher, you'll map those out. Your researcher is then going to think about what's the best method to answer these questions. And then they'll actually like find the right people, set up the interviews or set up the surveys or what have you, or the focus groups. And there's tons of other complicated research methods and questions and stuff like that you could ask. That's what the researcher does. And they're working very closely with the designer and the product manager as well. And they're basically, working together to guide, like, what are we building and why? And then once you have that, the designer is now going to take that and like the whole team is going to have a debrief on like the outcomes of the research, the learnings, and thinking about how do we actually interpret it. And so once you have that, then the designer can start working on some explorations, right? On like how, okay, we have the research, now we really know exactly what people want. Now let's start figuring out how do we map it out and stuff like that. And then once they have a final exploration, they'll go through several rounds of feedback. A lot of times in corporate, there are a lot of things you can't do for legal reasons, policy reasons, whatever. And so they'll go through several rounds of feedback. The design will evolve, and then we'll test it out with a small group of users. And then if the test goes well and it's showing that, hey, this is actually working and it's actually helping people accomplish their goals, then we'll scale it out even further. So that is what the design process from a product design standpoint looks like at a big company. I think the key difference is, one, you have way more partners involved. And so actually knowing how to work with different people with different disciplines who think differently than you, who have different levels of understanding of design and even why design matters, you have to know how to do that. It's a lot more selling and communication involved with your partners, because when you're freelancing, you're really selling the client the most, but like the core team, it's not the same where it's like you have to kind of like convince and influence people in a certain direction as much, because it's just a smaller team, right? And it's a small and tight design team. So there's a lot more selling and communication involved. There's also like a more robust research process, right? Where you're actually talking to people or like listening to interviews or reading survey responses. And then there's also testing involved, right? So you want to test with a very, very, very small audience that's low risk, that you can see how the product actually does and validate your assumptions on what you think the solution to the problem is. And then once you have that validation and like your data scientist is like looking at like, oh, how does this data performing? How is this thing performing? How are people using it? Is it good? Okay, cool. Let's double down and let's now ship it. Or it's not good. Let's keep tweaking it until we get it right, or let's not ship it, right? And so that's the process that we basically go through for a bunch of different features on a regular basis.
Okay. That was really insightful. You mentioned UX connecting to people's emotions and stuff like that. A lot of people don't understand that that's a real thing. And honestly, I didn't used to think in that direction before. But yeah, it's a really awesome thing. One of the most interesting things I learned about UI UX is the fact that it's basically you, the designer, trying to connect directly to your user. And it's not really about you or what you can do, it's about you giving to your client. So yeah, that's super awesome. And so yeah, people usually like just throw away the fact that designing something is actually you're trying to connect to the person you're designing for. And that's important. Yeah. So everybody listening, as a designer, you have to be a good listener, you have to be a good people person, and just basically do those things properly. You don't even have to know how to do art. First,
yeah, honestly. That was a big thing for me too, because like I think art and design are very connected but also different. And I think that like being an artist can actually make you a better designer, but you don't need to be an artist to be a designer. And I think that's something that because I think of myself as more of a designer than an artist. But like the art is actually really helpful when it comes to connecting with people emotionally. So like your background as a painter, for example, right? Like you have an understanding of color, of visual balance, of like, you know, composition. I'm a photographer, right? So that's something I did that's actually like my first design thing that I ever did. Which I didn't even know was really design back then, but it actually is. because you're thinking about how do you compose a picture, like how do you frame the subject, all that kind of stuff. And it's, again, trying to solve a problem. But like, yeah, that type of artistic perspective, it allows you to connect with people emotionally. And there's a great book called Emotional Design that actually talks about like this very concept. And it talks about how like a lot of times, like, you know, you can just look at a design and you feel an emotion. Like this Popeye picture, like it drives a very specific type of association versus like if it was like a picture of just like, you know, outer space and just stars, right? Like your mind is going to make different types of associations and emotions to that, right? And it's like all the little things about like color and all the things that as designers we obsess over, all that stuff influences the emotions of the person, even if it's like at the subconscious level, right? And that's what the book kind of like actually goes through. And I think that all of that, like the only way you're able to do that is, like you said, if you're like focused on giving and being a people person and all that, because it's like, it really is like a giving type of job where you have to like really like, it's solving problems and trying to figure out how do you like, you know, add value for people. And that I feel like is what it's all about.
I've been geeking out and asking you a lot of questions. So if you have any questions for me,
Absolutely.
I would. So do you have any questions?
Yeah, like what do you, I guess like, so you're a designer, you've been doing this for a month and a half, which is awesome. You're already on a podcast, so you're making crazy progress. But it's like, I guess like, what is your biggest thing that you're struggling with right now as a designer?
Confidence. I get super afraid to show people things I've done. But that's a big thing for me. Like I do something and then I look at it and I'm like, this what's this? What have you done? And then I have a deadline in front of me, like you're supposed to send this to your supervisor. I'm like, no, I'm not going to. And I beat myself up about it, and I go through an entire process, give myself like 7,000 pep talks, and then just send it in an email and just run to sleep or something so that I don't get. But yeah, that's like one of the biggest things that I'm trying so hard to stop. Something else is that mood board thing you mentioned before, like me thinking that I'm not good enough because I'm mooching off of something somebody else has done. I think that has been a bit easier to overcome. Honestly, the truth is that the goal is for you to connect to what people have done, connect what people have done to your user, and try and change that up, put your personality in it, help your user achieve what they want to achieve. So yeah, that's another challenge. But yeah, it's been a wonderful ride for me, and like the most important thing for me is the fact that I really really like the job. So like whatever thing makes me like don't say sad or something that seems like it's frustrating me, I always come back. I always come back because I like it, because I'm enjoying it, which is a very important thing that anybody should do. Keep in mind when looking for a job, looking for something to do. You have to enjoy what you're doing.
It's a big time commitment for sure, and a lot of your energy is going to be going towards that. And yeah, I totally feel you on just like dealing with the confidence and the mooching type of stuff. I think that's something that a lot of junior designers we have to overcome. I've struggled with that because you kind of feel like you're not a real designer. You see all these people who have the fancy titles and degrees and all this kind of stuff, and they understand all the technical terminology and stuff like that. And you're just like, I think this looks good. And I think that like that it's tough. And so what I think really helps with that is like you kind of focus on the goal, right? It's just like, okay, well, you know, your design may not be perfect, but if you walk people through, this is what I was trying to do. You see what I'm saying? This is what I was trying to do, and this is why I made these decisions. Like, this is why I chose to do it like this. And I feel like if you do that, like it kind of makes it easier to kind of like share your work because it's really focused on like the thinking, right? And it's like, you don't get attached to the final deliverable, right? It's really about like, okay, does this work? This was the goal. This is how I thought about it. This is why we chose to use these types of colors and this type of style and blah, 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 blah. Boom. Let me know what you think. And then, if they give you some feedback, then it's about like, knowing how to manage that feedback as well. It's like, okay, well, they didn't like this. They don't think this makes sense, and challenging different stuff and making sure they understand all the assumptions and making sure you and your supervisor or your end user just aligned on like, this is the goal and this is how we're going to get there. But I think that would be the biggest thing on that front. And I think that on the mooching side of things, like all designers do it, even designers at Facebook, at Google, and like they're all on Pinterest and stuff like that. But yeah, and I know we got less than a minute left, so I don't want to keep going until of the shoulders of giants. You know what I'm saying? And so that doesn't make you not a real designer just because you're leveraging what's already out there. Like everything is a reflection of, something else, And I feel like that's really a part of like art and the whole design process as a whole. Yeah, I think the whole message of what we were talking about before was like, struggling with building confidence and also feeling imposter syndrome just because you're building off of other people's designs. I think those are two things that every designer struggles with no matter what, even at Facebook and Google. So like that should be very reassuring in and of itself. And those two skills, like the confidence part, is actually one of the keys to like, I think, leveling up as a designer, because you'll notice that all major companies, they'll require an interview where you actually have to talk about your designs and you have to present a case study and walk through your design process, and they're going to challenge you and they're going to intentionally try to push your buttons and try to like challenge your thinking, and like you have to defend your position, because especially if you're working in a big company, like I said, like a lot of your job is not just going to be creating, it's actually going to be convincing people that the strategy and the way you're thinking about the problem is correct. So that is an important skill to build, and it comes from being intentional, because like confidence comes from when I can tell you like, I made this thing red because of these 3 reasons, right? Like if I can tell you that and they're believable reasons, they make sense, like then it's going to be like, oh, okay, cool. Like they feel more reassurance in you. So that's really what it comes down to, like just like walk people through your thinking. And then you should have confidence in that, because if there's anything that's like that they don't get or that doesn't resonate, well, that's fine. You just means that maybe there was some miscommunication. You maybe didn't understand the problem the same way or whatever. And you can adjust accordingly. Right. So I think that like the best way to deal with that is just again, like, and then just, know that when they give you feedback on your designs, it's not a reflection of you. It's just a reflection of the designs. Like they're not saying Riva sucks or Malik sucks or whatever. They're just be like, oh, I think that we could have accomplished this goal a different way. Let's talk about other ways that we could do that. And then you're going to be like, okay, let me hear your feedback. And you'll listen and you'll be like, does their feedback make sense? Or do they misunderstand something? Or can I explain it better for them to get like what we're trying to do, right? And I think the mooching off designs thing, like everyone does that. Like competitive analysis is like a key thing. Like, that's actually a big part of my job. Like just studying what other companies and people are doing and brands are doing and figuring out what do we learn from that. And that's actually a very important skill that I think like doing freelance design actually maybe get better at. Because as a marketer, I do a lot of that type of work, but just by like I'm constantly like just analyzing different companies, design styles, systems, like you just have a way like stronger foundation in terms of how to actually do that. So yeah, it's totally normal, and it's like don't trip off of that. Like you're still a real designer, because being a designer is about being someone who solves a problem. That's it. Not, oh, you're not a designer unless you create every pixel yourself. No, that's not efficient, bro. Like you got so many other things you could be doing right now. Like, do you really need to spend 10 hours doing this,
So inefficient. Like honestly, I think like 80% of the job is communication. like good communication. If you don't have communication, it doesn't matter how good a designer you are or how awesome or how nicely you speak. If you don't communicate properly with the people you're working with, everything is bogus. Everything is
Yep.
crap.
And design is all about communication from the product side, like you're communicating with the user without being there in person, right? It's like you're basically like, it's like being someone's like personal assistant even, or like handmaid, or even like, it's just like, imagine like when you're using an app, it's like somebody is appearing to you and walking you through every step. It's like, hey, you want to post a status? Okay, come with me. I'll show you how to do that. So yeah, just put your text here, do this, do this. You want to add a picture here? Cool. Like that's what you're doing. And so as someone who's high, if you're highly empathetic, you like communicating with people, design is a great way that you can do that.
Yeah.
On the back end side of creating the solution, that's what actually makes the best designers, right? The ones who know how to communicate the best, that knows how to get alignment, get everyone on the same page, get everyone excited, and who can kind of like guide people through the process. Because a lot of times people, that confidence is so important, because what you'll learn is that a lot of people who are not design or artistically or creatively inclined, they don't understand the design process at all. To them, it's just a magic black box where we tell what we need to our designer and they do their hocus pocus and make it look pretty and make everybody happy, right? And so you need to feel confident that like, I don't know anything about this design stuff, but when I give it to Reva, she gonna handle it. You feel me? And that's really the energy. And that's why like when you are confident and you can't explain your process, it makes you so much better, because it creates reassurance in your stakeholders and in your clients that like we're going on the right direction, you know?
Yeah. So they think people are going to have also a bunch of different questions. Like, is UI UX a growing field? I personally think it is. Is it a good career? I'm completely biased, and I would say yes. Like nobody should be doing any other kind of job. And then that being said, since there's no better job, how do you start out? Like, how do you start? So like,
go ahead.
Answers to those questions, like, is it a growing field? Is it a good career? And how do you start?
Yes, growing very quickly. There's a lot of data you can find on that. I mean, it's tech. Everything in tech is growing. More internet, more products, more apps, more designers. Good career. Yeah, if you're someone who likes solving problems, who likes communicating, who likes the intersection of the business side of things with the creative and analytical side of things, because that's why I love it. It allows you to mix a lot of different fields together. And I think the other thing, in terms of like, okay, how do you get into it? I think take an intro class, go on Udemy, go on YouTube, go on Skillshare. There's a lot of free classes that are really, really good, and a lot of really good free resources that just walk you through the basics of design. Because once you understand the basics, you know, like that's all you need to start. And then you should just start making stuff and creating content around what you're making. Huge strategy. It's just like, just start creating your own personal projects, redesign one of your favorite apps. And then the key is like documenting why you're doing everything that you're doing, right? Like document the thinking behind each step. I chose to do this because of this, to achieve this goal, or to create this effect or emotion in the end user. And if you document all of that and you actually keep doing more projects, not only will you get better, but then you'll be able to use that to get opportunities as a freelancer or as a career, which is actually what I did. Like I just took a class in college and I was like, yeah, this is really fun. I love this class, my favorite class ever. So I joined the coding club where we learned how to make websites in HTML. And I was like, wow, this is great. And then my friend is like, hey man, you want to make a website for me? I was like, yeah, dude, for sure. And I made a website for him. And then I used it for my class project and I got paid for it too. And I was like, oh, this is great. And then I just kept making websites, right? Like, so he's like, I know somebody else who needs a website. I was like, oh, cool. Tell them they can hit me up. And then I'll be like, what kind of website you need? And then I help them make it. And I just kept doing that process, doing it. And I was sharing it on Instagram. I was posting stuff on like, you know, really only Instagram at that stage. And people were like, more people came to me and more opportunities came up. And I just started doing more projects. And now it's to the point where I've done so many projects that I have a portfolio, and you only need like a couple. You only need 3 projects, you know, to have a portfolio. You only need a couple case studies, right? So don't stress yourself out. But like once you have a portfolio, then there's a lot of opportunities that can come up, you know, from like a career perspective or whatever. And it just comes down to like how you sell your experiences, knowing the value that you create, and knowing what you actually want. So like the real big thing is just like start making stuff now. Like go get Figma, it's free. You know, get some templates, like play around, think about making a website for yourself, for your friend, for your mom, whatever you need to do, you know? But once you start making stuff and documenting the thinking, you'll not only get better, but you'll also have a body of work that can create a ton of opportunities for you. Because now you'll be able to point to something and be like, look, I can do this. I'm an expert at this.
Yeah.
You know, I can help you. Right. And so you can do, once you have that, there's so much that you can do.
Yeah. So people listening, start now. Start anything. You don't need a degree. You don't need art background. You don't need so much. Just be hungry for information and start now. Everybody start now. So this has been super fun. Like so fun. I've had so much fun with this conversation. Like honestly, I can't express that enough. So like thank you so much for letting me geek out, ask you a bunch of questions. This has been awesome. This has been super fun. So I guess sadly we would have to let you go.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for having me. I also had fun. I think that what you guys are doing is awesome. Like this format is so powerful because like it's so valuable. This is what we wanted when we were students. Like I wanted a podcast where a student could ask somebody a couple years ahead, yo bro, what do you even do all day? Like, cause I think I want to do it too. You know what I mean? So like, I think you guys are really onto something. So keep pushing out this content. Don't stop, you know, and yeah, keep supporting that IO Nibbles content. You feel me?